Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 45 of the Say Again podcast with me, Amrita Tripathi. I've learned so much along with so many of you over the past year. We've had some incredible guests, some incredible conversations, and we're going to do our best to put together a best of season 2 for you as well going forward. I'd love to hear, especially from those of you who've watched or listened to more than one episode this past year, on what resonated with you, what are some of the suggestions or comments you might have, and I'll be aiming to improve this podcast as we go month on month, week on week. This is a weekly podcast that drops every Tuesday usually. I missed a week here and there, but I am looking at whether there's another day in the week that will be more helpful or useful going forward. As of now, we're going to stick to Tuesdays because that seems to work for many of you. We're going to also see if we want to have themed conversations month after month, or if you enjoy this sort of eclectic mix of experts in their field talking about their own domain expertise, their own leadership journeys, where they index on empathy and compassion in leadership, and certainly some of the innovation and trends that they're looking out for, as well as what they've learned about success and failure over the years. In fact, this is what I want to ask some of you to weigh in on this episode as well. Where have you reached in your journey? What would you consider success? What would you consider a failure? And has that definition really changed for you over the trajectory of your own leadership journey? That's something I'm certainly interested in finding out more. So you can drop a comment. You can also email or use the usual social media channels. There will be some giveaways, and definitely looking forward to sharing some of those with you going forward. I want to talk to you a little bit about leadership in this episode and some of the attributes and traits we've learned to value, some of the lessons learned along the way, thanks to conversations with leading lights like CEOs, MDs, startup founders, and more. I think that leadership has a lot more to do, of course, than just your designation and whether you're in fact leading a team right now. We all know people who seem to have these natural born abilities, and I think you'll find, especially mid-career and on, that these are qualities and attributes that they also have to work on. We have seen, in the sort of corporate setup, the corporate jargon, of course, that we are moving from a VUCA to a BANI world. A VUCA world is something that leaders were talking about for a long time, which seems to be moving now over the past couple of years, certainly, to a BANI world, which is brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. So as a leader, how you show up for your team matters now more than ever. How do you show up and project stability even in a time of volatility? I think for those of you who are dealing with attrition and layoffs and downsizing or restructuring in your companies, and we know certainly so many of the tech giants are dealing with this, and it's now almost par for the course at some of these companies. There's a seasonal kind of atmosphere to the levels of attrition. If you're in these companies and you're a manager or senior manager and don't actually have too much say in who gets let go and who gets to stay, how do you show up as a leader, right? If you're someone who's a senior manager or team leader who does have some amount of say, how do you actually communicate confidentially? How do you communicate with clarity? Or how do you even sort of share some of that stability with folks when you know that they might be impacted ahead of time? I think these are all challenges that leaders have to face. These are real world problems. It's certainly not a one size fits all solution that can be found. I certainly think that the best leaders do manage to find their empathy and compassion. I've seen managers, team leaders who have, taken the hit on behalf of their teams. We've also seen, leaders who have gone the extra mile to ensure that their direct reports find a job or get some sort of mentorship and support, even if they're not able to save their jobs. I do think it's a very difficult time to be a leader, but it's certainly no easier being on a team at a time like this. We've all seen the headlines or heard of cases of folks who are moonlighting, working multiple jobs without necessarily disclosing. I'm definitely a big one for disclosing as much as you can and being as ethical and upfront as you can. And certainly I've had the good fortune of working in companies where you could do your own sort of side hustle or side gig after work hours or on the weekend, and there was certainly a disclosure that you had to make. There had to be no conflict of interest, etc. There are ways to navigate this. As a leader, I think there are ways for you to also show up for your team, not just in the workspace, but outside the workspace. I'm not a huge fan of the generational divide that seems to have come up in almost all the conversations you have nowadays when it comes to the work culture. I do think there is an increasing understanding that we're going to have to really transform the way we show up at work We're going to have to transform the way we work, not least because of the rise of Gen AI and how all the workflows are probably going to be thrown out the window. You're seeing already replacements because of agentic AI. You're seeing replacements when it comes to internships, when it comes to coders, when it comes to even some of the jobs in banking, as we're tracking. We do know what's going to set many people in the workforce apart when it comes to the next 5 to 10 years of work, depending on where you are in that career trajectory. We have heard from leaders talking about the importance of resilience, talking about the importance of being able to be flexible, talking about the importance, of course, of upskilling yourself. So making sure you're on track of what the trends are in your industry, you're on track of as much of the latest innovation and information that you need to be to continue to be a productive member of the team. And for leaders, I think that also means going above and beyond and making sure that your team members are making the most of their learning opportunities, making sure that they're getting the kind of mentorship, allyship, and support that they might need, even if that's not really in your job description. I think the other thing to think about when you look at trying to be a good leader is how do you treat people who are not just your superiors, right? I think that we've seen a lot of people who manage up, as they say, very well. And I've had experience of this myself. I'm sure many of you have as well. Some folks are very good at managing up, but not as good at managing their teams or managing the folks who are maybe junior to them in the hierarchy of the organization. That's not a great leader. That's not a leader anyone should aspire to be. And I think that especially in teams that have that kind of flatlined hierarchies, but understanding that everyone has a point of view, has a voice, and should have the opportunity to be heard, that certainly is critical. I think it's important not to punch down. That should go without saying, but all of us have seen managers who do that, more than we'd care to admit, perhaps. Punching down is obviously never okay, whether in the workplace or otherwise. I think that we do need to have more robust workplace etiquette. Especially in India, I find that this sort of always on culture, when it's not necessary, is really, really detrimental. But I don't think that, you need one more opinion on the number of work hours required. We had a great conversation, from the Say Again podcast episode with Abhishek Kumar on that, which I will also link here. And that brings me to startup founders. Many of us have dealt with much more complicated challenges, at least it feels that way, much more complicated challenges than when you're working at an organization. As a startup founder, I think I learned pretty early on that this isn't for everyone, and there's no shame in admitting that. There's a very high rate of failure. We've seen that is put at 90 or 95% of startups that fail, and I think that's something we also need to be okay talking about. I think we also need to be able to talk about the amount of pressure that comes with the territory, and it's not surprising that so many folks go on to burnout quietly. Often, I think, unless you're very, very successful and have raised a huge round of funding and then gone on to have a wonderful exit. I don't see so many people talking about it unless they've had that incredible set of circumstances. But it's very true. It's a very lonely gig. It can be very difficult. And I think if you don't have the right support system around you, it's very hard for folks to understand exactly what you're doing. We do have a small group, in fact, at Tap and Tribe for founders across genders, where we're looking at seeing what the kind of support could be that we could access from our incredible mentors who are part of the VC and sort of fund world, to those who can provide perhaps more mental and emotional health support and counseling, not to mention the joy of having sort of peers and allies along the way. So that's a plug for Tap in Tribe and for founders there. And finally, I do think that, when we talk about empathy, when we talk about success and failure, when we talk about your sort of leadership journey and your professional career, it does help to have a long view, right? There are going to be sort of, ups and downs and sort of ebbs and flows. I think that's very normal and par for the course when you look at your career, when you look at that journey, that 20, 30-year journey. I don't think it's unusual to have moments where you're kind of feeling that not much is happening or you don't have as much control as you'd like. The trick is to try and go out there and meet more interesting people and meet people who might, provide you a different perspective. And that's certainly why I'm also interested in looking at how we define success and failure for ourselves, apart from that kind of rat race of, success being just literally getting promotion after promotion after promotion, which is wonderful. Of course, if that is what you enjoy and what keeps you going. But how do you define success and failure? I'd be interested to know. And I have been thinking more and more about this, concept of eudaimonia, which we studied when we were studying philosophy back in the day, ancient Greek philosophy to be specific. And this idea is of having lived a life well lived, So at the end of your life, at the end of your time, have you had a well-lived life? And what does that mean exactly? How do you go about creating, curating, crafting this life that might just be well-lived after all, that may not conform to the success and failure or that trajectory or the linear trajectory that everyone seems to think we want, which probably we don't, which is probably not even possible. So eudaimonia, something to think about. If you like the idea of that, we might dig deep in another solo episode, but we'll have much more for you in the weeks going forward for Say Again, including new chats, new conversations, as well as a best of. Thanks so much for watching or listening wherever you are, and I look forward to being in touch.